log in number 2 on the 6th of January 2023. Let me just guess at a simple model of the English pattern of love and marriage over the last 1,000 years or so. This is based on my book on marriage and love in England, as well as other writings and more recent thoughts. The pattern is fairly consistent from the earliest evidence, that is, from the Anglo-Saxons through to the present. And that is that for the vast majority of the population, the higher nobility are often an exception, but for 99% from the gentry downwards, the pattern is almost universally of marriages based on choice of the partner, and that choice is determined by the feelings of the man and the woman towards each other. In other words, it is what's sometimes called the romantic love complex. That is the pattern, of course, which we now take for granted in the West and spread to America and other parts of the Anglosphere, and has shaped to a certain extent many other traditions. Now, the broader pattern is roughly as follows. A child is born, male or female in England, and from very early on, from the first invisible signals it receives from its parents onwards, it is aware that the love between its parents, or their bond, even if it's not still a ripe love, but the relationship between them, often later one of friendship and companionship, is the most important in their parents' lives. In other words, the husband and wife comes first, their own parents come second or third, and their children come second or third. So that the child immediately is given signals that if they want to establish a long and enduring relationship where they are number one in the relationship for the other person, they cannot do it with their parents. Despite Freud and the Oedipus complex and the rest of it, to remain fixated on your mother or your father for life is emotionally crippling and disastrous and fruitless in many ways, because they cannot reciprocate that. A father cannot love his daughter more than his partner unless he wants the marriage to break up, and vice versa. So from infancy, this is what you are being taught, and you are certainly being taught this as you become aware of the world around you. I examined this in my own autobiography in the first 5 years of my life when I was in India. My parents' letters to each other are sometimes related to this theme, where my father and mother are telling each other that they mean most of all, while they love their children and put a huge amount of effort into them, it is their relationship which is number one. This attitude, which I think is very different from that in most societies historically, continues as you become 7, 8, 9, 10, that sort of period. In my case, dramatically, at the age of 8, I was sent away from my home to a boarding school, and I would remain in boarding schools for the next 10 years. Historically, going to a boarding school was a minority activity. There were boarding schools in England from very early on, from the Anglo-Saxons onwards, but only a minority of the upper middle class sent their children away to boarding schools. But the others sent them away to other locations. If you were among the labouring or poorer classes, you were sent away as a servant or a labourer to another household from very early on, from anything from 8 to 13, that period. If you were a slightly richer middle class family, you might try to send your child, male or female in both cases, away as an apprentice, someone who was learning a skill with a master, and they were bound as an apprentice to that master for 7 or more years, and in return for working for free they would get board and lodging and be brought up by that master, and by the end of it they were established as craftsmen or workers. And that took place among many of the middling ranks of England. At the higher level, at the aristocratic or higher gentry level, you might send your children away to become servitors or waiting persons or assistant dressers or whatever in another aristocratic family. There would be a swap. You would go to the Earl of whatever's and be brought up by them. Now this pattern obviously re-emphasized the difference and gap between you and your parents, because what they were saying is you are leaving the familistic family unit and you are going out into the world to join society more generally, to become an independent person who decides for yourself what your life is going to be like. You become emotionally, economically, and in every way a mature and distinct and separate individual. And your parents will stay with each other and you go away. Now, the going away physically was the characteristic of much of this as we look at it from the medieval period onwards. But today, many children don't physically leave home until their late teens or even later. But having observed my grandchildren, for example, I can see that the same psychological pattern is there, that from the age of 10, 11, they are expected to become independent. Their school friends, their school life, society more generally, becomes what is most important for them. They live at home, but they are in their bedrooms, and they do not expect to be number one in that household, in their relations. So psychologically, they leave the community, the family, and go out into the society. The move from Gemeinschaft to Gesellschaft. And by the age of late teens, they are basically more or less adults. They manage some of their own affairs and their money, and they have boyfriends and girlfriends and their own opinions on things, and they have to be treated increasingly by their parents as equals and hopefully friends. This is the pattern which has been documented in so many autobiographies and so many other materials. It's behind John Locke's description of English education, where you turn from being a child to being a friend, hopefully, where you have no legal or moral responsibilities towards your parents, except insofar as they have treated you well, and therefore you owe them a debt of gratitude. But it is not based on legal or absolute requirements. So basically, from the period of your early teens and before, what a child is in England and the Anglosphere is learning is how to perform satisfactorily in the wider social environment, how to manage politically, socially, economically, ideologically, and emotionally. And when I examine my own autobiography, which I've done in a number of detailed volumes, I can see that even from my preparatory school, when I had little crushes on love affairs with, or not love affairs, but crushes on other boys or occasionally girls, I was trying out my wings, fluttering around the nest to see what love was about. I felt that power of love, but of course it was not going to lead to marriage or a long-term relationship. But very early on, and in that period, I was beginning to be trained in the ideology of love. Much of the poetry which I learnt extensively in that school was love poetry. The drama that I watched or performed in, whether it was Shakespeare, Midsummer Night's Dream, or Romeo and Juliet, or other plays, or whether it was the music and drama of Gilbert and Sullivan, which was set around love always. Nearly every one of his operettas is about love. And so I was being trained in the romantic love literature tradition from the age of 8 or 9 onwards. And that increased considerably when I went to Sedbergh School at the age of 13, and throughout those 5 years, most of the English literature and some of the history and other formal teaching was around the theme of love, what it is, and how you know it to be true, how you find out the person you love. It didn't lead at that stage to anything more than a few infatuations on older or younger boys, because this was an all-boys school. But in the holidays, from about the age of 16 or 17, I and my sisters used to go to parties and have parties and begin to be trained in the arts of courtship and romance. And that's all documented again. It was really at university that I had my first 2 serious love affairs, where I learnt to become totally of one mind almost with a girl. And in that period, the final stages of the change in my relationship to my parents, and particularly my mother, occurred, where my mother became a friend, a co-worker, an advisor. I still loved her, obviously, but she very graciously made way for what she knew would be the most important relationships in my life, which was other people of my own age. And so by the time I decided to marry, at the age of 25, I assumed that the way I would choose such a person was through getting to know them and finding that we shared so much and liked each other, and there was a physical attraction, and so basis for marriage. The pattern from then onwards was that you would set up a separate home, probably nowhere near your parents, or often nowhere near them. You would become economically independent, and you would live a separate life. And then you would start all over again with your own children and experience this system. Now, this system, as one can see, fits perfectly with a certain kind of social and other system. It fits with one which is very individualistic. Each person is on their own unless and until they meet the significant other. They can cooperate and associate and do things together, but they are free actors. It fits well with a system where there is a good deal of equality between the genders, because both men and women are assumed largely to be equal, and you cannot force your husband or your wife to marry you, or in the marriage there should be equality in the relationship. It fits with a society with a great deal of social mobility, where people don't have to stay in their particular caste or class, but can look for other people who they feel usually have a similar sort of educational and social background, but that's not essential. It fits with high geographical mobility, that you will almost certainly meet your partner somewhere away from where you were born and brought up. And it fits with a market economy system because, as Max Weber and others have pointed out, there's a great deal of elective affinity between a market capitalist system where you are attracted to certain things which are produced for you by the market. You go out, you go to the market and you look along the shelves and you think, I need that, I want that. And advertising obviously plays on that. That desire and consummation in the purchase is on a very large scale what you do with the marriage market. You have many, many different offers. At first they seem significant, or you drop them, and then you decide to make a purchase and own them. So there is a good deal of ownership and consummation there. So that, very simply, is what I think the Anglosphere system of love and marriage is. It wasn't shaped by the Industrial Revolution. It was there well before the Industrial Revolution. It wasn't shaped primarily by Protestantism or Puritanism. It was there before Henry VIII. It wasn't a new phenomenon caused by a supposed capitalist revolution of the late 15th, 16th, 17th centuries. It was an integral feature of the social structure and legal system which you find going back to the Anglo-Saxons, and it is something that fits with Christianity. There is some resemblance between Christianity and this system, and Jesus himself famously suggested that you should leave your parents and follow him, or go off and find someone else, a shocking pronouncement. So the individualism and the higher sets of ties that you have in Christianity fits well with this system. but it's not a simple one-to-one relationship, and Christianity in different forms, in Catholicism or Eastern Christianity, can coexist with some variations on this pattern. Much of continental Southern Europe has a different pattern with much more continuity in your relations and love of your parents and so on. But Christianity is one of the background features. But I suspect that a very large part of it goes back to the early patterns of the people who settled in Northern Europe, the Germanic peoples, because it's documented indirectly in Tacitus's description of the Germanic peoples, and you find it in Anglo-Saxon literature and poetry and institutions and economic organization. So this is model one. This is the Anglo-Saxon pattern of marriage and love, which I've experienced and analysed in my own life, and I've seen it all around me. It is not unchanging. There are many new features in the last 50 years or so as I've observed my own society, and of course in a place like England it coexists with many other traditions, Hindu, Islamic, and so on. So we have a much more mixed situation now, and what I've described is an ideal type, not in the ideal that we should follow it, but in the simplified model type, and it has many variations. But I think that is the heart of it, and it is against that I will subsequently measure other great traditions in Asia and elsewhere.